All right, we will call the CNRAC meeting to order here at 10:03. Thank you for being here. I think we have a good agenda before us, a couple speakers on very relevant topics to CNRAC and some issues that either our working groups have been focused on or that we identified during our last field trip, and we'll talk a little bit more about that during the council report. We do have some CNRAC members joining us remotely. I believe Janet Sweeney is on, in addition to those that are in the room, and Ephraim is on as well. So thank you for being on remotely, and thanks to those that can make it in Harrisburg today. We're going to go right into our first public comment period because we do have Pat Henderson from the Marcellus Shale Coalition to offer some public comments. So Pat, you can, I think, come up to the live mic on the end of the table there. Thanks. Okay. Can you press your the push button on the mic? I think that'll make it live.
How's that?
I think that's better.
Great, thank you. Good morning. My name is Patrick Henderson. I serve as Director of Government Affairs for the Marcellus Shale Coalition. The MSC is the statewide trade association representing companies engaged in all facets of shale gas development in Pennsylvania. I wish to take a minute and bring to DCNR and this council's attention a timely issue regarding a policy that impacts its lands. Currently, the Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection is accepting comments on its environmental justice policy. The policy is ostensibly intended to enhance engagement opportunities for members of communities that DEP regards as environmental justice areas, areas which may have experienced disproportionate environmental impacts over the years. To effectuate this, DEP has developed a brand new online screening tool that provides weight or value to certain data points and then designates approximately 20% of the Commonwealth as environmental justice communities. While the underlying policy of enhancing public engagement is laudable, the new screening tool bears paying attention to by this council and the department. The criteria utilized by the screening tool are largely subjective and arbitrary and lead to some puzzling outcomes. These outcomes are worthy of examination as to whether DEP has identified appropriate criteria which reflect communities bearing a disproportionate environmental impact. For example, a geographically large census block group in the middle of Sproul State Forest, one of the most remote areas of the Commonwealth with little, if any, industrial activity, scores extremely high on DEP's cancer percentile rankings, which is enough to elevate a significant part of the forest as an environmental justice community. Ironically, the cancer scoring percentiles used by DEP for Sproul State Forest seem to exceed that of the overwhelming majority of the city of Philadelphia. In another example, a census block group in remote Greene County is designated as an EJ area largely due to the presence, but not impact of, conventional and unconventional wells, compressor stations, and coal mining. Despite the presence of these attributes, the tract scores extremely well with respect to actual environmental exposures, and according to DEP, even has the lowest toxic water emission score of 0% in the entire state. Particulate matter and ozone levels also score extremely well compared to statewide averages. Ironically, the entirety of Ryerson Station State Park, a crown jewel of the state park system, is located within this tract and is therefore designated an environmental justice area. In addition to slowing permit timeframes, this designation has other ramifications. Imagine local or state marketing or tourism efforts to promote this region, a region DEP's own data says is among the cleanest in the state, only to be faced with a designation as an EJ area that supposedly suffers disproportionate environmental burdens. There are other examples of publicly owned lands worth exploring, not only of DCNR, but also of state game lands. The purpose of these comments is to draw the department and the council's attention to the policy, the screening tool, and its ramifications. I urge the department to engage with DEP to help inform on what criteria are appropriate for the screening tool, as the current tool, which is in effect now, does not appear ready for prime time. I thank you for your attention and the opportunity to offer these comments.
Thank you, Patrick, for your comments. And if you don't mind providing your written comments or either digitally or in paper form, we'll enter them into CNRAC's record.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you. Do you have any other public comment, either online or in person? All right. This isn't really public comment per se, but we did receive an inquiry following the second CNRAC conversation from one of the participants that had some additional questions that we didn't have time to answer during the webinar, and we're just passing that inquiry along to the appropriate staff within DCNR. So just so you're aware, it did generate a couple questions, thoughtful questions.
Can you hear
All
me?
right.
This is Jerry Walls. Can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you, Jerry.
I'm sorry for.
Thanks for joining us.
Well, I'm sorry for doing it this way, but we didn't get back from our trip to Albania and Greece until last night, and so it's been a struggle to even get to this point. I had every intention of being there in person, as I had told Ara, but it just didn't work out. Okay, my question to CNRAC and to the concept from Patrick Henry is that if we do not engage on this issue, it looks to me like it's one of those confrontations that is going to undermine a lot of DCNR's work and undermine the state investments in outdoor recreation. So I do agree that we should go on record about this. I'm not sure that I totally agree with everything the presenter alleges, but I think it's worth a very serious policy and other environmental investigation. Thank you.
Well, first, Jerry, thanks for being on. And that's it's a quick turnaround to be on a public call right after traveling halfway across the world. So thank you. I think maybe during our working session, we can talk about if there's one of our work groups that would be appropriate to maybe dig into the issue a little bit more, see how it overlaps with CNRAC's priorities and the work of the agency. And then we can dig in from there. Okay. So hearing no other public comment, we'll move forward to approval of our September minutes. You should have received these via Gretchen a week or so ago. Are there any revisions or additions to the September minutes? Hearing none, or is there anyone that would make a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved.
Okay, we have a motion, a second.
Second.
Thank you, Sarah. All those in favor of approval, say aye.
Aye.
Okay, minutes are approved. Thank you. I'll provide just a quick council report that really is several thank yous. The first is thank you again to Meredith and the team for the CNRAC conversation that was hosted, the second part of a two-part series. We can talk about that a little more during our work group reports, but just to reiterate how successful those were, we had a very large number of people registered, trickled down a little bit by the time it showed up for the people on there. But anytime you can get like close to 100 people or 80 people or whatever ended up being on a public webinar, during the day is pretty impressive. So I think we really did hit on topics that are of wide interest, very high quality speakers. So thank you for the effort that you and your planning group put into that. The other thank you is again to the Bureau of Forestry for hosting us last public meeting in the region so we could look at the ATV pilot connector project and learn more about what's going on in the region with extension of the Pine Creek Rail Trail and the economic impacts of outdoor recreation. The Bureau of Forestry staff was, knowledgeable and of course, really informative as always. And I think we did learn a lot. We took, as CNRAC members know, all of our observations and our feedback compiled that into a memo that was really just a list of observations and suggestions, and a couple identified areas where we flagged opportunities for CNRAC to be involved in evaluation and future implementation of ATV policy. And we put that into a white paper and made it available to John Norbeck on October 14th, and he acknowledged receiving that. So we'll continue to look forward to seeing the final, or a final version of the report to comment on. But I thought it was really nice timing that we were able to provide some feedback on those initial findings as the final report's being developed. And I think the only other update I wanted to provide were 2 notes of congratulations. We have a new state forester, Seth Castle. We all know Seth and have been able to work with him on a variety of issues. It's great that you can sort of look around the country and try to find a great leader, and he's right in the agency already and ready to go on day one. So congratulations to Seth, and also congratulations to Claire Jantz, who is Deputy Secretary now for Conservation and Technical Services, Lauren Ingram's former role. And Claire comes from Shippensburg University and their research center that focuses on land use and sustainability. So DCNR leadership continues to add really talented people and elevate them. So we appreciate being able to work with some great people. Okay, with that, I'll turn it over to Secretary Dunn for her report.
I'll point out that we once had Silas on our ranks, and he got away from us. So,
Yeah.
just saying. I mean,
true.
it was wonderful while it lasted, and of course he's been a critical partner ever since, and it's good to have him on that side as well. Anyway, thanks for the opportunity to be here. Sorry I missed your last meeting. I was just across Route 6 from where you were at an event with the governor at Kinsler Bridge State Park. He and the First Lady made a stop there to celebrate the public lands, outdoor recreation in the fall, kind of generating a lot of interest in outdoor recreation. And then he went to a nearby recreation-related businesses, tourism-related business called the Sunshine Factory, spelled S-O-N, Sunshine, where they plant sunflowers all along Route 6 and then make a distilled spirit from the sunflowers, and have a nice venue, a very nice venue. What was also gratifying, on the way into the bar where you could the longest I forget what type of hardwood bar there. It was like the longest piece of it in the state. Well, you probably know what it was. Hemlock, yeah. Hemlock. And then another bar had a big piece of cherry. But on the way in, there was an educational display about hardwoods and the importance of forests and the hardwood industry, et cetera. So it was a good educational spot as well. Anyway, governor was pretty pumped up about outdoor recreation, the benefit to Pennsylvanians, benefit to our economy. And it's just one more step in outdoor recreation and building and supporting the economy. We know it's there around outdoor recreation. We had the governor then in Bethlehem to announce the C2P2 grant round for this year on the Bethlehem Greenway. And that's an area we've been working on for years, essentially connects near the DNL Trail, which is one of our main goal trails. So it's still across the bridge from there, but it connects South Bethlehem Greenway down towards Salcon Valley Trail. We were in Salcon Valley Rail Trail a couple of years ago. When we had finished that 8-mile segment, a bike shop owner named Steve, I can't remember his last name, came out to that event and just talked about the benefit of even that 8 miles and what it did for the community along Hellertown and along the Salcon Valley Rail Trail, and how, I think interestingly, they sold more bikes, but perhaps more interestingly, a lot of bike baskets. When he analyzed, well, why is he selling all these baskets? It's because people in that area were starting to use their bikes to go and shop. And they go up and down. Hellertown spread out along highway there. I can't remember what it is. But he was seeing people visiting on the street, visiting on the trail, using their basket to go around and get various things. Of course, that's good for people's health, good for the economy. But now this connector where we used as kind of the marquee grant will connect to South Bethlehem, which is really pretty cool. But the C2P2 grant was $52.5 million this grant round, which is a very nice grant round. Last year was exceptional because we pushed some ARPA money out through the grants. But this year we had 23 trail projects. We protected 6,835 acres of open space and land, 13 projects for rivers conservation, 13 community watershed forestry projects, 99 projects to develop or rehabilitate rec park and conservation areas and facilities. So that was wonderful. The demand was high this grant round, so we were able to say yes to a lot of good grants. We're kind of back at where we used to be, where we turned down about half the grant requests we have because of demand. So when you think about Pennsylvania with all the municipalities, all the townships, and all the recreation needs across the state, even if it's a very healthy grant program, there's still a lot of need out there. And with more money, we could make more grants. So one of the neat events I went to later was with partner Tim Schaefer at Fish and Boat Commission. Tim in Fish and Boat, along with funding from us, did a boat launch at White Mills into the little town along the Lackawaxen River. And the Lackawaxen, if you've never seen it, it's a beautiful river. It's a trout, nice trout stream. It's nice for paddling sports. It's a small stream. It's up in the northeast. It's really pretty wild. But interestingly, along the whole Lackawaxen, there had been no boat access. No boat access. The community really rallied around this one. The opening event, which Fish and Boat Commission was lead on, it had dozens and dozens and dozens of people. They couldn't have been more. It was like a state park opening when people were so excited for this boat. The community co-funded it. They decided they really cared about ADA access and made it more like of a destination, an accessible destination. So it was really pretty exciting, and everyone was happy all around. And speaking of partners, Tim Schaefer, Fish and Boat Commission, spoke here. And I'm really delighted that Brian Burhands, our partner in the other resource management agency, the Game Commission, is here today. I would say that in my experience, the commissions, Fish and Boat and Game and DCNR, have the best collaborative relationship we've had any time in our history. I give a lot of credit to Brian and Tim for their good collaborative work. When you think about the public lands of Pennsylvania, this whole mosaic of public lands is one of the assets that we really have in the state. It's a busy time for Brian. It's about to get busier as we get into the rifle deer and really get into one of the high value times in our mission. So we're glad to have Brian here. And one thing I'll just comment too, I go around a lot across the state to events and public fairs and public events, and the Game Commission is out there more than I've ever seen. They have a strong presence. They're talking to people, they're educating people. Brian's really cranked up their public face, and I think that's phenomenal because people are very, very interested in wildlife. I'll see, looking ahead here. Another good project that we did an event on, the Schuylkill River Greenway connection. Was this last week? Schuylkill River Greenway it goes farther north than most people realize. Everyone is focused on the Philly, the area and the area through Pottstown and all that. But when you get north of Port Clinton, there's a fair amount of Schuylkill River Trail that's been finished. It's really attractive. It's in a very rural area of Schuylkill County. And it was a difficult trail gap there over a railroad feature, and hit numerous legal and other issues. And eventually the local partners persisted, and we were able to celebrate with Elaine Schaefer of Schuylkill River Heritage one one of your former
Another place
roles.
I used to work.
Yeah.
So the message is when I leave somewhere, good things happen.
That's not true. You build a good base and then people can build on. But that was also, I mean, dozens and dozens of people celebrating that trail gap being closed. It was one of our top 10 trail gaps. You've heard us talk about top 10 trail gaps. That was one of them. And so we were very excited by that. Picking up on what Silas talked about, Claire Jantz is coming in, she'll begin in mid-December, so we'll have her in front of CNRAC. We're excited to attract someone of her caliber. I'm on a Shippensburg Advisory Committee. That was my alum as well, my alma mater, and of course they're really mad at me. So, but Claire is an incredible asset, very knowledgeable. I'm making a pile of things to brief her on when she comes in. I opened some of these publications and like she's written a chapter of them. So it's going to be, Claire's going to come in really ready to add value right away. And she already is. This week, we started a new Bureau Director in Admin Services. Many of you got to know Stacy Amsler and then Danielle Beach. Danielle just took a job up at DEP. A promotion. So we started Shaw Wong on Monday as our Bureau Director for Admin Services. You'll get to meet her at some point. She came to us from the Department of Revenue. Again, fully ready to do the job. Long time public servant, state government, so she understands budget. Another piece of news about Arlene Marshall Hawkinsmith. Arlene's been here for several months now, I think maybe about 4 months, her Director of Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Belonging. But many of us celebrated with her last night at the Capitol Rotunda when she was honored by Weiner University. And we were just very, very proud of that accomplishment and then her life story. So that was exciting for us. As Silas mentioned, we named a couple months ago now, Seth Castle was our new state forester. Again, did a full search, started with 40 inside, external and internal, got it down to 4, got it down to 2, got it down to 1. And Seth is our new state forester. He has hit the ground running. Many of you know him from his work. He's presented here many, many times. We'll get Seth in front of you with whenever you request it, but he has done a phenomenal job already. None of us are surprised by that. Let's see, we're actively planning the development at the 3 new state parks. We have public processes, different places. At the Big Elk Creek, we have had both. We've had both 2 public meetings at Big Elk. We've had 1 meeting at the Susquehanna Riverlands. We're taking information and feedback by online methods as well. We have at Vosburg, the planning process is a little more low key. It's a smaller piece of land and we don't see a lot of change in there, that we'll have to develop some of the infrastructure we need to operate the state park. So that's proceeding pretty well. We're getting a lot of interest in all 3 areas. Let me see. I guess that's it. I'll stop with that and take any questions. And again, looking forward to a busy winter. Bob's talking to the groundhog about some snow. We'll be planning some big tree events. So there's all kinds of good news coming with tree planting and funding from U.S. Forest Service on tree cover. So that's something to stay tuned on.
Good morning. Thank you for your report. I'm just wondering what sort of feedback you're hearing. You mentioned you're getting comments on the new state parks. What's the flavor and nature of the comments you're receiving?
All over the place. I mean, people want trails, people want to walk and hike. People from farther away want to camp. People live close to them don't want camping, which is not unusual. People concerned about the environment, making sure we're aware of where endangered species are, which we very much are. Demand for camping statewide is up. I mean, we're filling up. People have to reserve campsites and overnight accommodations 11 months ahead. We're not really able to serve people the way we'd like to with overnight. So that's the demand we see and, from the public that wants to travel. But again, as always, any change locally is always met with some skepticism and concern. So we're paying attention, meeting with people, talking to legislators, and working through that.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions for the secretary for folks virtually? See anybody unmuting?
I don't have a question, but I just wanted to say I live up in northern Pennsylvania, and we're really excited about the trails in White Mills. I wasn't able to make it to the celebration, but just wanted to say that I was one of the many community supporters of that group, of that project. And there, as you said, there's not a lot of accesses in that area, so you have to travel quite far, either to the Delaware River or opposite to the Lackawanna. And so, it wouldn't have been possible without the support of DCNR and the Fish and Boat Commission. And I think it's going to be a really great asset to the community. So yeah, thanks.
Yeah, people were very excited. That's where like statewide recreation planning is so important, because you see where the real gaps are. And we see a big need for camping in the southeast part of the state. We see a need for river access. And people are looking for, more and more people, kayaking is really growing, but people are looking for like shorter family trips. They can get out, get on and get off maybe a couple hours downstream. So that's a big demand. And we were really glad when Tim brought back their water access program and co-funding with us. So it was really working out.
Yeah. It was like a full day to do any sort of kayak trip there. So I think it's going to be really neat. Like you said, families, just shorter trips, and just an influx of, for the local economy. So I think it's a really exciting project for that.
Good. Good. Thanks for supporting it.
Janet, do you have a question?
I don't have a question. I just had a information for folks. I'm not sure if everyone at CNRAC knows that. Also, thanks to DCNR and Fish and Boat and Richard King Mellon, Pennsylvania Organization for Watersheds and Rivers has a smaller non-motorized access grant program for state, it's statewide, and it's for any Pennsylvania waterways, and it's up to 30,000. So we're hoping that like the momentum of the projects like at White Mills, we'll be able to do smaller projects to make some of the, the access a little bit closer upstream and downstream. So if anyone is interested in that, you can just check out the Power website and certainly share that information with your colleagues across the state, because we're trying to get these grants out there and create these access points.
Great. Thanks, Janet. Cindy, I don't know if this is best directed to you or someone else, but how is our vacancies in positions and hiring going for the agency right now? Or is it trending in the right direction, or is it still a struggle?
State parks has really gotten down to zero. They really, and it's tough when there's like an opening and there's layers upon layers of people get a promotion. It's really hard to keep that down. And forestry's really working on it. So it's trending the right way.
That's good. Okay.
Yeah. It's always at end of year, early in the next year, there's always, that's one of the retirement surge times. This makes sense for people financially. And so you'll enter a challenging time here.
As I pointed out to several people this morning, when I came in, the 27 Storm Tracker vehicle was parked out front. I don't know if they know something we don't know, but I happened to look down here and notice that I'm on microphone number 27. Think about it.
I don't want to undermine your belief, but if there was a storm for them to track, wouldn't they be out tracking it somewhere? Not parked here. Okay, just I don't want to jinx you.
North, Bob.
All right. Okay, thank you, Secretary. We appreciate it. We'll move on to Gretchen's department report.
Good morning, everybody. Good seeing you all. My report is brief this morning, but I want to remind you that next year's meeting schedule already, can you believe it? 2024. And we'll put this in an email for all of you. But as always, they are the fourth Wednesday of every other month starting in January. So that makes it January 24, March 27, May 22nd, July 24th, September 25th, and November 20. This is always the odd meeting because we don't want to schedule the day before Thanksgiving. So we always bump it up and make November the third Wednesday as the meeting date. So mark your calendars. Hard to believe that we're talking about 2024. Nicole and I have been wrestling over this seat, but it is likely that she will be taking over this seat in January. We've been trying to transition the transfer of the liaison duties, and that looks like that will probably occur, but you may see me back here from time to time. If she would have a schedule conflict, I'd gladly see you guys on the fourth Wednesday of every other month. So we are moving on a couple of names to fill vacancies for council. I have not heard back on whether those names would be accepted or not. It still leaves us with a couple of vacancies. So just a reminder that if you've got ideas of individuals who would make a good choice to serve as a council member, we welcome you submitting those names. Think about various industries, think about geographic locations, think about demographic representation of the council, all those to speak to diversity to make sure that we're representing Pennsylvanians adequately. And just one bit of news note is that the conclusions report for the Growing Outdoor Recreation for Pennsylvania, GORP, that Nathan Rigner led for the last year will be coming out in December. And as a reminder, that is really to take all of that data that he heard from his conversations, both with people involved in the industry and his counterparts throughout the nation, into report a set of recommendations, a set of strategies for how to lift up the outdoor recreation economy and what role the office will play in lifting up that economy. So that report will be kind of a guidebook for the office. It's not representative of the office's work per se, because this is really a collective effort that would be, touched on by many organizations and individuals who will be helping us move that forward. So look for that, and certainly you're welcome to invite Nathan back at any time for various presentations on specifics of the report or the report itself. So I just want to alert you that it's coming, and that is it for me. And also coming at the end of this week is new outdoor recreation data from Pennsylvania, from the Bureau of Economic Analysis that will come out nationwide. And then we'll have specifics relating to Pennsylvania. So we'll make sure you all know about what that is. So any questions for me?
Janet, did I see a hand raised? Digital hand raised?
I did, but it was, but Gretchen answered it. I was going to ask if Nathan was going to go on the road again with all the results, because we just had a meeting yesterday where people were wondering when those results, when the report out from all of the GORP meetings was going to happen, and then was Nathan going to take it on the road? And I think it sounded like, Gretchen, that it's more like we would invite him as opposed to he's going to do more regional meetings. Is that correct?
Well, I think the plan, Janet, will be one to correspond with all of the email addresses we collected from the 600 or so people that attended those meetings. So, or 500, maybe I exaggerated there. But a good bit of people that we want to make sure we reach back out to. So that report will get in their hands. And then I was speaking in terms of council, certainly invite him back at any time to make a presentation, or he may request an invite for specific information he wants to deliver. But Janet, the thought is for the office, because it is a small office and capacity is limited, that once So he would hold an outdoor economic summit like one year, and the other year would be a series of regional meetings to engage stakeholders on a regional basis. So I think that thought is to go out on the road. Whether I think this year, 2024, he is envisioning some sort of summit. So stay tuned for those details. But yes, it will. He does plan to be on the road, and he is on the road quite a bit. But to really get into communities and regions to have those interaction, those conversations, I think he felt was very valuable. So that will continue. Thanks.
Okay, thank you.
Gretchen, when you say the report's coming out, like before the end of this calendar year? Okay.
Probably mid. Send code, probably sometime mid-December. You know how deadlines always go, and maybe it'll slip a little past that. But yeah, and it will just be digital. We don't plan to print the report, but so that'll be easy to share with all of you as soon as it comes out.
And our CNRAC work group on economic contributions has, sort of been on pause a little bit, waiting for the release of this report, because we'll use it as our blueprint for where we focus CNRAC's attention in terms of the office and how we can support it, how we can be supportive of that ongoing outreach, a summit. So this will really give us some good marching orders when it comes out in December. Any other questions for Gretchen?
Tyler,
Jerry?
This is Jerry. First, I want to go back to Secretary Dunn. I appreciate your collaboration with Pennsylvania Fish and Boat Commission to work on more river accesses. We've seen that as a very important thing from the Susquehanna Greenway Partnership's point of view. On the first Saturday in August, we were sold out weeks in advance for our river sojourn on the north branch of the Susquehanna, which was a day-long event. And we had over 100 kayakers out there on the river. And then we've had other events on the West Branch, and they've been well participated in. But the important thing is that I think if we can mobilize more news coverage of those events, the local newspapers might find that to be very, very interesting content with some photos about all those people outside enjoying our wonderful resources. And I think that that helps to promote this whole idea of investments in outdoor education, outdoor recreation are a wise investment. And I think that the partnership of organizations like our Susquehanna Greenway Partnership and the private companies that rent all the kayaks and other boating equipment could be beneficial.
Great. Thank you, Jerry. And I agree. I know, having helped run the Schuylkill River Sojourn, some of the photos that came out of, kayakers on the Philadelphia skyline or launching in Whitehaven are pretty iconic, and they were always picked up by local media and state media. So I agree. Those are great moments to, promote, let people know why those investments are so important. Okay. Any other comments before we move on? Okay, we'll move on to Eric Nelson with a legislative report, and Eric's joining us virtually.
Hey, good morning, everyone. I'll be brief. I'll just mention that today, the House Labor and Industry Committee, they're having a hearing on Senate Bill 429, which we've been following probably for the past few years. It's a Senator Regan bill, and it would amend. Actually, it would extend Heart and Lung Act benefits to our rangers, ranger supervisors, ranger operations specialists, and state park officers employed by us. So that's there's a hearing today on that. It's not a voting meeting, it's just a hearing. And that's really all I have right now. If anybody has any questions, I'll take them.
Not being that familiar with the topic, Eric, is that legislation that the department generally supports?
Yes.
Okay, sounded like it, just making
Yep.
sure. Okay. Any questions for Eric?
Eric, or Silas, also, I know fish has it, and I believe game has heart and lung as well. So it falls in line that that should happen.
So being consistent across the agencies. Yep. Okay. All right. Thank you, Eric.
Thank you.
All right. And we can move on to Brian now. Thanks, Brian, for being here with us to share an update on the Game Commission's work and for sitting in on the first half of our meeting as well. We appreciate it.
Appreciate very much the opportunity. And I know we got a PowerPoint. There we go. Do you have a clicker or do you want me to just say next slide? Okay. Well, thank you again. Hey, I've ever given an opportunity to talk about the Pennsylvania Game Commission. I'm always happy to do so. So thank you for the invitation to be here today. The Pennsylvania Game Commission, our mission is to manage and protect wildlife and their habitats and while promoting hunting and trapping for current and future generations. So let's break that down a little bit. The hunting and trapping is in there. It's in statute as well, because hunting and trapping is a tool for wildlife management. But going back to the first part, managing wildlife and their habitats, everybody thinks of Pennsylvania Game Commission as deer, turkey, bear, but we're responsible for managing 480 species, all wild birds and wild mammals here in Pennsylvania. Next slide. So our scope is very, very large as an agency, although we're relatively small as an agency. The work we have and the work we impact is quite tremendous. We have over 1 million or about 1 million hunters. We have about 2 million Pennsylvanians that identify themselves as hunters. And that puts us actually number 2 in the country, with only Texas exceeding Pennsylvania in the number of licensed hunters, which is pretty phenomenal when you think about how large that state is. We have, you look at the number of species that we hunt, 26 game mammals, 51 game birds. So the majority of the species that we're working with are not hunted species. But obviously the hunted species, a lot of work goes into that because you have to carefully manage those species. It's interesting when you're a natural resource, DCNR faces this, Fish and Boat faces this, Pennsylvania Game Commission faces it. And I always like to tell this story, as an agencies that are responsible for basically the trustee of a public trust. With that comes always controversy and conflict and difficult discussions. So for example, since opening day of deer season comes up here in 2 weeks, we'll pick the white-tailed deer as an example. And I always like to offer this example to give people some insight of, well, why is it always in the paper? Why are people at the coffee shop always arguing over hunting? Well, here's an example, white-tailed deer. We serve all citizens of Pennsylvania. So we have to, in developing our management plans, consider the comments and perceptions of all citizens of Pennsylvania. And we have methodology to do that. So in the white-tailed deer, for example, I may have in a community a homeowner that loves to see deer. They're out there feeding the deer coming into the feed. They have names for the deer. 2 doors down, I got another homeowner who's sick and tired of these deer, eating every shrub in their yard down to nothing, hitting their car against deer and everything else. So there's conflict right there. Let's look at agriculture. Obviously, agriculture suffers an impact from depredation of crops by wildlife. And it's not that they want deer, for example, out of there, but there is a limit of what they can tolerate. Forest landowners. Forestry is a big, big industry here in the state of Pennsylvania. With too many deer, you don't have that next forest growing. You've basically got nothing on the floor and a bunch of adult trees. And when you cut that forest, you're not going to have anything grow back. So we have that conflict. Usually your forest landowners want reasonable number of deer to allow them to continue to have a sustainable forest. Now let's look at hunters, and even within the hunter ranks, let's look at my archery hunters. My archery hunters, they don't want anybody in the woods. They want nice peace and quiet. They got the best weather of the entire season. But then I've got within my archers, I've got vertical bows and I've got crossbows, and they want to argue that one's more effective than the other and they should have different seasons because I want this. Now let's go to rifle deer hunters, the most interesting one, very traditional here in Pennsylvania. I've got some rifle deer hunters that, well, if they see 30 to 40 deer a day, that's how they identify a positive, good day in the woods. That's a lot of deer if you're seeing 30 or 40 deer a day. Whereas I have many, many other hunters that want to see big bodied, healthy deer, maybe large antlers. That's kind of their measure of success. My point in all this is we serve a community of customers, if you will, that want everything you can imagine under the sun from the same resource. So when we talk about the controversies, because you asked a great question of what are you hearing around state parks and the new state parks, that's exactly what we deal with as trustees of a public resource. And I find it fascinating. It can be frustrating as well, but it's interesting. But what I was asked to come here today and talk about, next slide, is about license sales and where Pennsylvania is for license sales. There's a lot to this graph, but you know, when we look at the number of hunters, we peaked out at about 1.38 million hunters in Pennsylvania. And then you ask, well, why the decline? And that's what everybody kind of focuses on. And why did the decline in hunters, which started about 1983, what caused that decline? I think we're not asking the right question. The question we should be asking is, why did we have such an increase up to 1.3 million hunters? And there's some good reasons in there. World War II, 1941, etc. Man, we had what, 13 million people go into World War II. That's the same size as the entire population of Pennsylvania, if I'm not mistaken. It's quite a few people. Well, what happened when they went in? Went to boot camp. They got trained with firearms. They got comfortable with firearms. All of a sudden, they started to leave and, hey, let's go try hunting. If you look at the 50s, that's where a lot of the state lease camps started to become developed that are still active today. And then you had Vietnam, another time. If you look at the graph there and you look at that dip, you'll see about that's when we became involved in Vietnam. And then we started to continue with that increase in hunters. So it's not what led to the decrease, although there's some factors that are inherent in that as well. But the increase in hunters is these big world global events that happen that introduce so many people to firearms as a contributing factor. And it's interesting when you look at the decline of license sales, which again started about 1983. Some say, well, isn't that when we saw less deer? Actually, the deer population continued to climb. We saw up through 2000, we saw a continual decline in hunters, even though you saw the antlered buck harvest continue to go up and up every year, which is indicative of an increasing population. What's also interesting when you look back to the 50s, 60s, 70s, we didn't have deer all over the state of Pennsylvania. It was pretty much confined to that north central Pennsylvania area, which started that really deep, rich deer hunting tradition, that part of the state. But I think there's some other factors that contribute to that decline, that some are related to game. When you look at, again, the 50s, 60s, 70s, deer hunting was very popular. But guess what? Small game hunting was king when it came to getting hunters out in the field. Agriculture was in a much different state. You know, you look at, for example, biotechnology and the role that's done to basically be able to feed so many people in this country because of that technology. But at the same time, that change in technology resulted in habitats that were not really good for small game, rabbits, pheasants. I came into hunting in the early 80s, late 70s when the pheasant population was on the decline. And I've heard some of the greatest stories of why pheasants went away from major storm events, disease, whatnot. No, it's as simple as habitat. Habitat started to change with the change in agriculture, you know, biotechnology. We had clean farming. We had so many things change at that time that just didn't provide that small game hunting opportunity. So personally, you know, and we still continue to look and analyze this, I think the loss in small game hunting opportunities in Pennsylvania was also a factor that contributed to this slow decline in hunters, as well as other social values. Organized sports, probably our biggest competitor when we look at getting youth involved in hunting and trapping or any other activity. That is a big competitor that is much more of an issue today than it ever was before. You know, you look at the declines in hunting over time, you know, we were averaging 3 to 5% a year. That's a major decline, yet Pennsylvania still has been doing better than most other states in that decline. So it's a pretty scary phenomenon. It's interesting, too, if you look at the age of somebody that went into World War II, 18 to 25, let's say, and you look at that decline where the sharp drop off, they hit about that 60 years old. And 60 years old is about when hunters start to basically stop hunting. There is an age where they age out. So you can see that pipeline was full of hunters that were growing in numbers, and then they aged out. And there was not as big a pipeline for newer hunters to continue to get into the activities of hunting and trapping, and you started to see that decline. And it's a challenge we still face today, very much so. And I don't know about you, but I don't want another World War II to be able to re-energize our hunting ranks again. Next slide. So, we've done many things to try to reverse this trend or stabilize this trend, and we've had some great success stories to be told. Specifically, there are 3 areas that the agency has focused to help with reverse these trends in hunter numbers. First, our Board of Commissioners has really made a point to emphasize setting seasons in such a way that it creates more opportunity. If you look at Title 34, that's really what the goal, and often this is kind of truncated in some of the narratives, but the agency is charged with creating more opportunities for hunting for citizens of Pennsylvania. And that's what they've done by extending seasons where it's biologically feasible. For example, the Saturday opener versus the Monday opener, which some hate, some love, but it's to create more opportunities, create more time for folks to be in the field. And in fact, the Saturday opener is just an example. It did work. It did help. Was it any huge jump? No, there is when it comes to recruiting and retaining and reactivating hunters. There is no silver bullet. It takes a lot of things at the same time to try to reverse those trends over time. So let's look at another activity. Second thing we've done to try to reverse these trends is we've made major investments in marketing and outreach. And those activities have worked. Recently, I think it was 2017, there was change in Congress for Pittman-Robertson, which is is the federal mechanism of funding that the agency receives, basically said, hey, and this was really pushed by the industry that is paying the 10% excise tax on arms and ammunition. They said, we need to see a benefit of this excise tax we're paying. So one of the things they recognized that state wildlife agencies really weren't making the investments needed for marketing outreach. So they basically changed the laws to make it more conducive for agencies to make investments in marketing, and it absolutely has worked. I look at this year, we had to change from in order to get an antlerless license, before you had to go through these pink envelopes, get your pink envelope, get your license, go ahead and open up the envelope, do address it to and a return stamped envelope, and go through this whole myriad of things. Now you just went online. I went online this year. The first day was kind of rough, but after that, 3 to 5 minutes, you're in, you're out, you're done. The marketing effort we wanted to put behind that, or we did put behind that, to make sure everybody knew the change and what was going on. Right now, for the first time in a long time, right now we're sitting on about a 1.65% increase just in general hunting licenses. That doesn't include all the extra tags or anything like that. So that marketing effort really makes a difference. And a lot of other state wildlife agencies have been doing this and continue to do this as well. So marketing has really been a big major player in our efforts and strategically trying to reverse these decreasing trends. Next graph. Or next slide. I forgot to mention that. Next slide. There we go. So R3, I mentioned that before. R3 really in the past 10 years has really surged and becoming part of the vernacular of agencies. Basically, it's just recruitment, retention, and reactivation of hunters. For an agency, one thing, for example, that we found is really focus on that demographic that already has a job, is mobile, has the expendable income. Those individuals at 24 to 35-year-old are really proven to be very effective groups for us to reach out to re-engage them, or engage them as first-time hunters or trappers in this activity. Whereas if you're 12 years old, if mom, dad, your grandfather can't take you hunting, you're not going to go hunting. If they're not going to take you to buy your hunting license, you're not. And we see about half of our hunter education graduates don't ever get a hunting license. So we see that in the data. But with the focus on getting some of those younger mid-adult, mid-career individuals into hunting has really played some really good dividends for you. Now, there's several ways that we've involved people into that as far as reactivating them in hunting. One is we launched a Learn to Hunt program, which consists of online resources and some even courses that we offer through at the agency. They're basically courses to offer the basics. You know, we can't start out telling them about how to load your own bullet unless you even know what you're going to hunt, or what rifle do you get, or you know, even the basics of the biologies of some of these species. Where do you go hunt squirrels? You know, how do I find them? What time of the day do I hunt them? You know, really focusing too on some of these small game species. There's such an emphasis on whitetail deer hunting, but whitetail deer hunting is not easy. It's, you know, it's easy to find them. They're ubiquitous within the state, but they're much more difficult of an animal to do it. So things like squirrels, not that they're easy, but number one, they are abundant. Number two, they really taste good. Same thing with rabbits and pheasants. You know, we stock, you know, a lot of pheasants here in Pennsylvania for recreational hunting. And over the past several years in this learn to hunt environment, we've been able to reach out to about 10,000 people out there. I love telling this story. We had a live one on, I believe it was squirrel hunting in Harrisburg at our headquarters. And we had one the previous night that was online. And here is offered in the evening, and all of a sudden they're getting ready to start the presentation, and this individual flies in the parking lot, gets out of his truck, runs to the door, and they're getting ready. I guess it locks automatically at that time of night. And they let him in. He says, "Oh man, thanks." He goes, "I was on the presentation last night, saw the scene presentation. I really wanted to come here and be here tonight." So it's been a really popular activity. People just want basic information. Next slide. Another way we're recruiting hunters is through mentored archery deer hunts. This is where we've been working with DCNR, for example, in Benjamin Rush State Park, as well as John Hines National Wildlife Refuge. And what's really fascinating about these events is that they're right down there in the Philadelphia area. Now, the first year we had kind of lukewarm, participation. This year we've got way more people interested than we can possibly put in place. We've gone through this fall, we had 60 mentees go through this program, and people that, you know, it's neat because a lot of them, you know, if you live in Philadelphia, you may not have transportation, you're taking a bus. So they're taking venison home on a bus, not the whole deer. It's, you know, it's been processed a little bit. I don't think they'd be happy with that. But it's proved to be really, really exciting for these individuals that never had that opportunity. There's some real benefits, local benefits to this, to the agencies and to a lot of individuals. One is the need for sharpshooters to reduce whitetail deer populations in some of these areas is reduced because of these hunting activities. Sharpshooters are very expensive and they are not very publicly acceptable, but hunting is, and it's proved to be a really good opportunity. What I think is really exciting about introducing hunting to the Philadelphia area, if you look at southeastern Pennsylvania, the majority of our population of Pennsylvania lives in southeastern Pennsylvania, especially Philadelphia. And a lot of the old school way of thinking, well, if they're city folks, they're not going to want to hunt. That is not true whatsoever. There are a lot of people in Philadelphia that just need the opportunity, the guidance, the support, the social networking opportunities in order to get engaged in that activity. If you grew up in downtown Philadelphia, you know, it may be a little bit mysterious of these wild areas, but they're interested and they want to learn more. What's interesting now is as this program continues to mature, we're seeing the mentees that were on the program now coming back as the mentors, and that's very, very exciting. So being able to take people from that part of the state who are communicating with people that are their peers and their colleagues has made all the difference in the world. Instead of somebody from Harrisburg or somebody's from Elk County, he spent his whole life out there hunting, telling somebody from Philadelphia how they should hunt. So there's a way to communications that's much different from that local level. Now I want to jump into the next topic. When we talk about hunting licenses and what are our risks, what are our dangers of the future of hunting or for hunting license sales and opportunities? Because you got to ask the question, well, why is number of hunting license that important? Chronic wasting disease is one important. Because can you imagine our efforts to be able to combat CWD if we did not have enough hunters in the woods? In fact, we are struggling right now to meet some of our harvest goals. Some of us in this profession refer to CWD as career wasting disease, but it is actually chronic wasting disease. Long term, this could affect license sales as people become more concerned about chronic wasting disease. It hasn't been shown to be for this prion to be able to jump into humans, but a lot of wildlife diseases and a lot of diseases that as humans that we have started in wildlife populations, it's a function of frequency and time. So is it impossible? No. Is it likely? We just don't know. Not enough time and frequency is there. But a lot of people have eaten CWD infected meat. We know that. We're aware of that. And so far it hasn't shown up yet. But deer truly are that keystone species. White-tailed deer now, where small game was a huge driver in license sales back in the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, we know white-tailed deer is the driver of hunting license sales in Pennsylvania. And the fact that CWD is such a threat to white-tailed deer populations in Pennsylvania, we've taken some very aggressive steps. Next slide. So a little bit of background about CWD, and I won't spend too much time because you probably do have a pretty good understanding, but CWD is incurable, always fatal. It affects all cervids. So that's going to be white-tailed deer, mule deer, which we don't have, obviously. Any of the cervids in the genus are going to be affected by CWD. So we got elk and deer here in Pennsylvania. It basically, similar to other prion diseases like CJD and Alzheimer's, it basically accumulates in the nervous system, in the brain, and it basically, the brain just becomes non-functional over time. In white-tailed deer, between onset of it getting the disease till when the deer finally succumbs to the disease, it's about between 18 and 24 months. But oftentimes, the deer dies of something else because of the change in behaviors. They're not allowed to escape predation very well. They often, we find that are around roads more than we would expect by chance. So they get hit by cars. So there's a lot going on. So when you think of prion, it's just all of us have prions in our bodies right now. It's all mammals, we have prions. The problem with prions is when they are misfolded, they become misfolded. They're not sure exactly how that happens, but as more of those prions misfold, they basically accumulate in the nervous system and ultimately results in death of the animal or changes in behavior that causes the death. Next slide. How do we get CWD? CWD can be spread in wild deer through deer-to-deer contact. White-tailed deer are very social animals. They're constantly licking each other and, around each other. And they have these small family groups, and that's where you see the spread of these deer. Primarily, the prions are most frequently found in the saliva, the urine, and the feces. And what's fascinating but scary as heck is these prions can withstand freezing no issues whatsoever. And in fact, they can live through temperatures over 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit. Your average prescribed fire in the woods is about 400 to 800 degrees. So prescribed fire is not going to kill a prion. So it is there, and it can basically stay in the soil because, again, this is not a living organism. It's just a prion. It can stay around in the environment for well over a decade. So it is it can be taken up by plants, and deer can get it that way. That's why the removing of high-risk parts is such a danger, and I'll point out that in a little bit. Next slide. So let's look at a short history of CWD. CWD was first identified in 1967 at a research facility in Colorado. In 1981, the first CWD detection was detected in wild elk in Colorado again. In 1998, the Pennsylvania Game Commission began surveillance for CWD. In 2002, the first detection of CWD was found east of the Mississippi in Wisconsin. In 2005, the first detections in New York and West Virginia. Now, New York was around a captive cervid facility. West Virginia was not. And to the only guess that we have right now, it was high-risk parts that were dumped into West Virginia that potentially did infect other deer. And in 2012 were the first CWD detections here in Pennsylvania. Next slide. What you can see on this slide, I know the letters may be small, but the red circles are CWD in captive facilities currently, and the yellow is CWD in captive facilities depopulated. So if you look in some of these southeastern states, for example, that don't have a cervid operations, they don't have CWD, but some of them are now starting to pop positive because of likely high-risk parts. A few years ago, I remember our officers investigated where they found a deer carcass along the road. It was not during the season. Traced it back to a high fence shooting preserve. The hunter, which was from North Carolina, took the head, took it to North Carolina. We found that out, notified North Carolina Division of Wildlife. Their officers immediately were able to get that. That's how that disease can get spread through the high-risk parts. Remember, the brain, the spine, the nervous system is where you're going to find the highest concentrations. Even though you can find prions in any parts of the deer, the highest concentrations are going to be in that nervous system. And you can look at the pattern and see where, yes, sir.
To clarify on the term, so those, when you say captive facilities, those are like fenced
Yes,
preserves?
yep. Fence where they're legally categorized as livestock. So if you raise a deer and put it in a high fence, it's still livestock technically from a legal standpoint.
Interesting.
Next slide. So this next slide is where CWD was first encountered in Pennsylvania in both free-ranging and captive deer. Well, that's a different slide. That didn't print out. But anyway, it started with DMA1 in this slide. So the agency basically put into our response plan into place, and over 5 years continued monitoring and surveillance. We're not able to find any in whitetail deer, so that DMA1 dissolved. The next slide. Then you can see how, again, we've got, if I remember right, the stars are going to be the captive facility that pop positive. And when even a captive facility pops positive, we put a disease management area around it. And then we increase our surveillance to ensure that hasn't gone into the wild herd. And you can see in DMA2 is we consider the endemic area. This is where it first started, and this is where it's really spread. And unfortunately, we have areas where 30 to 40% of the deer are positive, that are harvested are positive for CWD. And we knew this and reported this early on in our efforts to combat CWD, and it grows and it's fast and it stays there. Our goal now with CWD is to slow the spread of CWD and to keep the prevalence as low as we can. When you get those high prevalence rates, it becomes very, very dangerous. Let's see. Next slide. So strategies that address risk factors of CWD. Number one, prohibitions on deer feeding is the biggest no-brainer when it comes to whitetail deer. Unfortunately, this is easier said than done. And we can all imagine where the problems with saying stop feeding deer comes into play. This is a huge social issue, and it is a direct risk to deer. If you think about it, deer, when they're chewing corn, they're salivating those bits of corn. If you ever watch them in a corn pile, they're dropping. If that deer's positive, the next deer coming in has a very high likelihood of obtaining CWD. We prohibit the use of natural-based attractants, again, because we want to limit that nose-to-nose contact. We want to limit the deer interaction with anything. Obviously, restricting the movement of high-risk parts, it's a very dangerous part of how that disease can spread. Obviously, we want to prohibit deer rehabilitation because of the risk. There's probably a certain period of time when a deer contracts CWD to when it's detectable. There's probably some period of time in there. We don't understand how long exactly that is, but there is probably a period. In fact, the testing that we do now is not for food grade testing. It's not something for that. It's basically, is it detected or is it not detected? So even a deer that comes back not detected, it could still have it, but we can't pick it up with the testing we have, and we have the best testing that we can have right now. So the ban on feeding, and the other aspect of it is reducing the deer herd, is bringing that deer herd down. The less deer, the slower the rate of spread could be. Because remember, this is going to be around family groups that these are going to be most quickly spread. And we have a lot of research through our Wildlife Futures program, which is a partnership with University of Pennsylvania Penn Vet, that we're looking at a number of new technologies. We've developed some really exciting technologies with dogs that can actually detect CWD in deer feces, so that we continue to work on some of these newer technologies, and you're going to be seeing some of that come out soon that will help with our surveillance. Next slide. Again, feeding deer, really is in an area where you have infected deer. This is going to be a major player when it comes to spreading CWD. And to be quite honest, here in Pennsylvania, there used to be a time when we had a winter kill of whitetail deer. We had so many deer in Pennsylvania, the land couldn't support the population of whitetails we had. In fact, our officers used to go out every spring and count the number of deer that starved to death along creeks every single spring. And they were primarily fawns of that year because, they're less able to reach up and gather the food they need. But we don't have, winter kill of whitetail deer now today is fairly insignificant. But because we have a much better managed deer population with better food supply, deer are not starving to death in Pennsylvania. But I sure can empathize and understand why people love to watch deer. It is a fun activity. Next slide. And the next slide. So Increased harvest opportunities, which is, again, we want to use hunters as our front line of being able to combat and manage this disease, is increase our antlers allocations, again, not to wipe out the deer herd in any far stretch of the imagination, but keep the deer herd at a level where we can minimize the risk of spread. Number two, using DMAP permits, again, especially on private lands, to help landowners deal with deer populations that are way too high. And we also are offering more extended seasons to make sure we hit the harvest goals. So through our deer management plan, we have antlerless harvest goals within each wildlife management area. And those are the goals we want to meet. This is not an eradication of deer. We're not trying to bring them down. You only see one incident every 5 years. This is to get the deer down to a reasonable level where we can better manage this disease. And next slide. Another way hunters are so important to helping the agency is through surveillance. There are states that just haven't done surveillance for CWD, and they finally did, and boom, guess what? It's here. Because it doesn't show up necessarily in the landscape. As I mentioned before, a lot of these deer that have CWD, their behavior changes, and they're killed by various other reasons that can be explained. But surveillance is critical, because if you're not looking, you'll never have CWD, which some days that sounds like a pretty darn good idea. But if you're looking, at least when it shows up, you can act quickly and promptly and best deal with it as best you can. And hunters do that in a couple ways. One of them is it's free to the hunters. They take the head from the deer, put it in a plastic bag, tagged, put it in these bins. We have technicians that come and they sample these, and that's one of our detection routes that we have. We also have roadkill deer collections that occur statewide to help us continue to do the surveillance necessary to pick up the disease as early as possible. And next slide. And we also have, of course, a new toll-free number for hunters that can call the office 24 hours a day, 833-PGC Hunt and 833-PGC Wild, WILD. You know, while most animals do not reach the late stages of CWD, this one has. And, you know, when you look at it from an individual animal perspective, this just is not a place to be. But unfortunately, we're going to have to live with and manage CWD here long term in Pennsylvania. If a hunter does have a D that's infected with CWD, they want to eat the deer, that's up to them. We're not going to tell them what they can and can't do. If they decide to not eat the deer, we will give them a replacement tag and let them continue to go out and hunt. But we encourage members of the public to report suspected animals. Now, just because the deer is acting like this does not mean it's got CWD either. There are things like rabies. The deer could have some type of injury. There are other things that can cause this type of behavior, but there are some things, how they tilt their ears and other things that are pretty indicative of CWD. And next slide with a big thank you, and I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Great. That was a lot of good information packed into a short period of time. Are there any questions?
Yes, Brian, thank you very much for the presentation. I appreciated it. One of the questions I have, our game lands are to be managed for basically wildlife management.
Mm-hmm.
Is there any increased interest in foresting some of our older forests to create younger growth forests? And the end result, I would hope, in wildlife management would be to create more grouse habitat.
Right.
Because, you know, it is our state bird. It has suffered greatly with West Nile virus, lack of habitat, et cetera. And my concern is, if we're moving towards that, I'm okay with that. If not, why not?
Okay, that's a great question. The answer is yes, we are moving towards that, but let me explain how we're doing that. So when it comes to forest management, you know, when you look at rough grouse, for example, it's getting hit by a double whammy. It's getting hit by West Nile virus and it's getting hit by poor habitat. A lot of the poor habitat in the state's really more of a function of timber harvest approximately, but ultimately what the value of the timber is. If you know, you look at any other state where you're in the southeast and you're managing bobwhite quail, if you have high timber prices or high pulpwood prices, you're going to have more early successional habitat, which is more conducive to those species. You know, markets are not very good for timber right now, but the way the Game Commission's addressing this, number one, you don't want to go out in 5 years and mow a bunch of forest down because it's all going to come back at the same time.
Right.
So what we have is a plan which we should to even even out our age classes across the game lands. So by, I think it's 2033, we will have reached our goal where our harvest plan is in a situation where we're basically equally allocating the different age classes of timber across the game lands landscape. In addition to that, we had recently, about 3-4 years ago, developed a tool for specifically rough grouse called PAST. And what that is a decision-making tool that we know that the virus that spreads West Nile virus isn't everywhere as abundant across the landscape. And through research that we've done, we found areas that have lower prevalence of West Nile virus is where we focus a lot more of our grouse management activities to try to help those populations out. I was out this fall. Fortunately, I got to see several grouse and glad to see them, but they're nowhere where they should be.
Okay. Also, on a personal note, I'd like to thank you for the mentored youth pheasant hunt. I've done it for 24 years for kids. The only thing I'm noticing is it's becoming less popular. And I think that's due to high school sports, et cetera. But I also think back, I'm 75 years old. What made me a hunter was small game.
Mm-hmm.
And basically, and not to sound gross, but to go out and be able to pull the trigger. When you hunt deer, it's a little different. It's a lot different.
It's a lot different.
It's a lot different.
I came in, I was at the age in the 70s and 80s where small game, going out rabbit hunting and pheasant hunting, because we had wild reproducing pheasants at that time because the habitat was different. And yeah, that's what got me into it. And I deer hunted as well because in the 80s we had deer throughout the state, but small game was my passion.
Yeah. And again, thank you for the youth pheasant mentored hunts because I think it's been very beneficial.
So thank you.
Looks like we have a question from Marcus online.
Okay.
Hey, thanks, Silas. Good morning, Brian. Thanks again for the presentation. I also have 2 questions. One, just to kind of tag along with what Rocco said. I'd love to learn more about the Learn to Hunt program and specifically if there's any partnership available in Southwestern Pennsylvania. I'll give more context after you respond.
Okay, wonderful. Yes, and we have done some programs right there in Pittsburgh recently, working with backcountry hunters and anglers. Would love to do more. So yeah, I'd like to connect with you and look at more of that.
Great. So just for more context around that, I was at the BHA event last year, but this year the city of Pittsburgh has actually been quite proactive and has created a deer management pilot program. So I don't know if you've heard much about that, but it allows city residents to enter a lottery system to participate in a controlled hunt. In 2 of our city parks, it's really focused on a management plan that will sustain and hopefully mitigate a lot of our landslides within Riverview Park. So it's been historically a park that's been overrun by deer, but I imagine that to be a really great opportunity if you haven't partnered with the city of Pittsburgh or considered more heavy participation, that it could be a program that could be lifted pretty swiftly, similar to what you have going on in Philadelphia with John Hines Center. So maybe we can take that conversation offline, but just wanted to present that in this space. So question number 2, I know that the state game lands for 51 and 138 have been closed since 2022 for climbing initiatives. Do you happen to have any update in regards to if that closure will be lifted or if that's going to be a permanent closure in perpetuity?
Yeah, that's going to be, as far as right now, a permanent closure. The issue there was green salamander habitat or populations, which is, on the fringe. In addition, we also have Allegheny wood rats, and there was a lot of pressure on there, especially with the salamanders, that the climbing activities were having an impact, because you could see, because they need that moss because of the moisture to be able to occupy that habitat. And, we worked with the climbing communities, which have been just remarkable to work with us in this issue. what other opportunities in other areas, maybe where green salamander and Allegheny wood rat may not be impacted. But the communities themselves, I've been out to that site several times, and they are very good stewards. But the activity itself does have impact to the critical habitats that green salamander habitat needs. So right now, the answer would be we haven't had any discussions about reopening it. But continue to look at other opportunities which wouldn't impact the species that we're concerned about.
Thank you, Brian.
Thank you.
Brian, thank you. That was very informative. You mentioned Elk County. I'm a resident of Elk County, but I also grew up in Beaver County and was part of the annual trek to Marionville, which was a suburb of Beaver County at the time, with all the hunters back in the day. But my question involves land use. I'm also a snowmobiler. Where I live in Elk County, I live about 200 yards from the game lands, and I'm on the board of directors of a rail trail that passes through the game lands.
Mm-hmm.
We've signed a cooperative agreement with the Game Commission to patrol that. I think that's mutually beneficial for both of us. But what has happened, and I'm going to use a local example, but this is true throughout the state, I believe. Earlier we heard from the Marcellus Shale Coalition, and obviously Marcellus Shale is a pretty big development in our area, and generally the population there will support it. But we lost a major recreational corridor to water hauling last year, not last year, it's been probably several years now, 5 or 6 years. In the middle of this corridor was a section of state game land. Of course, being a snowmobiler, we're restricted on when we could use, where we were granted access to state game lands. That restriction applied from middle of January was when we could get on the lands. I'm making this a long story, but the crux of the matter is, I believe it's the department's policy when recreational access is lost to Marcellus development that DCNR work with local jurisdictions and to try to develop a way around to replace that recreational access. And come to my attention recently that most of the people in my snowmobile club are hunters as well. Obviously in Elk County, basically everybody's a hunter. But we have some areas where with just a little use of state game land that was not previous, existing roads, but was not previously open for snowmobile access, we could probably, in concert with DCNR, replace this recreational access. It's the Shawmut grade. Replace this recreational access that we lost because of the Marcellus activity. And I just wonder, I hear Pittman Robertson quite a bit. And that's interesting too. I didn't realize that was an excise tax. Mm-hmm. The motorized community lives on a gas tax refund, from the federal government. So there's some similarities there. But I'm just wondering if there's the level of cooperation. It seems to me over the last 10 years or so with the department, and the level of cooperation has ratcheted up quite a bit. Between townships and municipalities and DCNR. And the citizens, I don't think, understand for the most part all the silos that we have. They just know that we've lost that access and we thought it was going to be replaced and it hasn't been. Long story, short question. Is there any ability to I don't know, it would take a cooperators agreement or what to maybe for some of these short sections that we would need to access if the commission would be amenable to working with us.
Well, I don't know specifics on those two game lands, and we can have an offline discussion to look at the details. But I will tell you this, because it's a really important question and a topic you bring up. When you look at DCNR land, you look at Game Commission land, you look at National Forest land, each of those has a different intent, if you will, or another a mission for what were purchased for and what they're to be used for. So with the Pennsylvania Game Commission, our mission and objectives for the intention for why those lands were purchased is different in some real defined ways than, say, DCNR, who had their land where, for example, recreation is part of their mission. For Pennsylvania Game Commission, those lands were purchased for wildlife and wildlife management, hunting and trapping. So that is the purpose of those lands. So what you'll find is not that the Game Commission is doesn't want recreation or, is trying to do it that way, but we try to mitigate that as best we can, especially when you're looking at ATV, snowmobile use, which, a lot of your constituents are hunters, but we get a lot of hunters that they want to seek solitude on those game lands. They don't want to have to listen to the engines running. So that when we look again, I go back to the public trust doctrine of how we're taking public resources and managing that for the trustee. This is the conflict that happens that, it's not that the agency is against those activities, but the intent of the lands, some of those, purchased with Pittman-Robertson Acts, which are again have to be for wildlife and wildlife restoration. Otherwise, you do get into some potential issues with federal regulations as well.
I appreciate your answer, and I certainly support it and understand the purpose of the game lands, and just a little bit of help here and there. I think we can help each other, just like we did with the cooperative agreement on the trail.
Yeah.
That's my point. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Just on the Shawmut Grade, I mean, we purchased that Claremont property with the Shawmut Grade in mind. And it does distress me. You mentioned before. And I know part of the issue was access. There was a lot of land that we didn't have the mineral rights to on that, and that was the outcome. But yeah, Brent, we should look over some maps and try to solve that issue with the DCNR lands if possible. That was an important asset on that big Claremont property. It's a big property, so maybe there's some opportunity.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Silas,
Brian,
Garrett, Silas. Hello, Silas.
Okay, go ahead, Jerry.
I'm sorry I couldn't be there, but I am a longtime deer hunter, and I have 5 tree stands that I hunt from. But we have several years ago, I had an unfortunate encounter right near my home where a deer jumped in front of my vehicle on my way home, and I hit it, and I turned it into the Game Commission, and it seemed to like it was had CWD, and I was hoping that I would have gotten some sort of response back about whether it did, and I never did. But my question to the Game Commission rep is, how does one go about following up when they get information on whether there's been a CWD infected deer encounter that they've had?
Yeah, we have a number. See if I have it here. It's CWD info. See if it's on here. If you look on our website about questions about CWD, there's a phone number you can call, and we have a dedicated person or several people that will answer those phone calls. If they didn't take your name, because your name may not be associated with that sample, but the location probably is identifiable, and they could probably follow up with you. Probably the reason they never got back to you is because they probably never had the information. So when a hunter provides a deer head, it's got their tag on there. So we have their CID number and all their contact information. If it's a roadkill, we get roadkills from, we have vendors that go out and collect roadkill deer. Hunters may turn those, or anybody may turn those in. So they probably just didn't have, but once that sample's selected, a way to report back. But if you call that CWD info number, it's on our website, they might be able to help you out and get you that information.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Brian, just as an afterthought, you mentioned that out of the hunter trapper education courses, 50% of those people never actually go back and go to fruition with buying a hunting license. My thought is, as part of the course, and I'm not sure how you would do it, but why not bring up areas where mentors can be searched out, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I know our club, we provide 5 courses a year. And usually, since we're the last course in Pennsylvania, our last course was last Saturday. We had over, I think it was 92 people there. So 45 of them hopefully would buy a hunting license. Yeah. But would it be better if, for instance, I was willing to mentor a hunter? and I didn't mind my contact information being displayed, if you will.
Yeah.
I just think that's one more way.
We do have, if you look on our Facebook website, we do have a platform that comes from the Hunter Education Council. I always mess up the acronym, but anyway, it's a database that you can, I got into the database, says, are you willing to be a mentor? And it doesn't really share anything about you. And then people who want to be mentored can go online and they can do as well. The problem is when you're talking about what age is allowed to participate, there's a lot of liability issues when it comes to younger children, if you will. I believe the age limit is 18 or above to be able to participate on that website and be able to do that, because there's some things that you got to be really careful of. So those younger, because that's why when we look at what the agency can do, those older individuals that are already mobile, have some finances and the ability to move around is much better. Because if you look at a 12-year-old, they're going to be really dependent on their friends or family. That's pretty much there. Now we're always looking for, like, I love turkey hunting and I love to take kids to the youth turkey season day. And I struggle finding youth to go take on that day. It's not easy for me. It's been a struggle. I found a couple. I'm always looking for an excuse to sit in the woods and listen to a turkey gobble. But it's tougher. But that middle group, there's more of them. It's just how do you find them? Now, fortunately, we have, like Backcountry Hunters and Anglers and National Deer Association and National Wild Turkey Federation. They do a really good job of really reaching that demographic and have been a big asset in helping us do that as well.
Sarah?
One quick question. So in my experience moving from the Allegheny National Forest to Pocono Mountains area, lots of deer feeding happening in private developments, HOAs. Is there any targeted outreach to those private developments and such about prohibiting deer feeding and education about chronic wasting disease?
We're doing more and more outreach through our marketing to educate individuals, because there are other diseases that can be spread to deer. And it causes so much problems when you look at roadkill incidences. You feeding deer in your backyard. Guess what? There is a road that's coming to your house. Death by BMW is not a pretty sight to see. In addition, you have fences, which are a danger to deer. You ever see those black fences with the spiky points to them? It's not a pretty sight to see a deer hung up on that. So there's a lot of dangers to white-tailed deer when they're fed in any area. And then when you bring them into a suburban area where there's vehicles and all kinds of other things that deer aren't used to handling, it's becomes an inhumane situation. I understand and empathize. Folks love to see deer. It's a beautiful, absolutely gorgeous animal. But what the dangers to the whitetail that because of that feeding is quite great.
So one final question, then we'll be respectful of your time and get you out of here. We, as a council, were up in Lycoming, Potter, Tioga County, visiting businesses and visiting a variety of communities. One of the things we heard, and it might be an unfair question because I don't know your data gets to it or not, is just some of the changes in how people are hunting. So there were a lot of observations made by business owners in particular that like the organized group hunting club type of outings has declined over time. And some of the non-hunting activities like snowmobiling, increasingly ATV use has sort of, taken a bigger chunk of patronage and local economic impact. Do you think that is sort of just that decline that, from a high point, people are sort of remembering that high point in time and it's declined ever since, or are there some actual changes underway in, organized hunting clubs, multiple hunters owning a cabin and sort of going there every single year on the same couple weeks? Are you seeing changes like that?
Absolutely. Over time, you've seen a decline. One of the changes we did see with the Saturday opener, this was measured by Kinswood Deer Cooperative, and I don't have the data right in front of me, but they did see an increase of hunter numbers on those days than in the past. But we continue. If you look at the decline in hunter numbers, you're going to see a decline in other places. The other factor is deer have become so ubiquitous throughout the state where you don't have to travel anywhere. When you look at the camps in the 50s and 60s and 40s when they were really established, you had to go there because there weren't whitetail deer anywhere else. I've seen that too because I'm a member of actually 2 state lease camps. I love them. I was up at it a couple weeks ago. I'll be up there in a couple more weeks. Wonderful experience, wonderful opportunity. I'd never be in a camp. I wouldn't be able to afford a camp, but a state lease system is a great activity. But you've seen the numbers in those camps decline. And I've also seen a lot of camps purchase for mountain biking, fishing, and other activities. So you're seeing that change over time. Or now the other questions that comes up, is hunting going to go away? No. We're looking at definitely a decline. Where's the bottom? There is a bottom. And we, through our seasons and bags, we can deal with to a level of a decrease in hunters, but we want to engage with more folks and get them engaged. My bigger fear outside of decrease in license sales is just a detachment from a younger generation to the outside, to the world, the woods we live in, and an unrealistic view of what wildlife are instead of a practical ecological understanding of how beautiful and diverse our landscape is here in Pennsylvania.
Well said. Thank you, Brian, for being with us. Thanks for all the good information and fielding our questions. We appreciate it.
Hey, I thank you, and I'll come back anytime. I'm going to go to my senior staff meeting.
All right. Thanks. Okay, so now we will turn to, actually, Arlene's probably not going to be able to make it for a presentation. She might stick her head in and say hi, just connect with us briefly. But Allie is here to provide an update on the Next Gen Council. So we will turn it over to Allie. And I think, Allie, you have a PowerPoint, right, that you're going to show?
Yes, I do. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for having me. I will try to keep this pretty brief. Okay, so I'm Allie Bowling, DCNR's Executive Policy Specialist. Next slide, I'm just gonna go right into it. So I just want to do a little introduction since I'll probably be working with you a little bit more often. I'm Allie Bowling. I started with the Commonwealth in August of 2022. I previously worked in the nonprofit and private industry sectors. I have one son. This is my son Felix on our first day hike. I'm having another boy in January, hoping to make that first day hike, but we'll see how that's going to go. And I began leading the Next Gen Advisory Council in March of 2023. Next slide, please. So I just wanted to remind everybody what Next Gen Advisory Council is. So it's an external council to the agency, which was established in early 2022, similar to CNRAC. We focus on providing a younger generation perspective to the agency. We have about 20 young, diverse members from across the Commonwealth. The priority age is from high school to age 35. We meet virtually, although we do try to provide opportunities for the council members to get out, like tree plantings locally, but since it's across the Commonwealth, that can be a little tough. And we have a lot of like high school age students, so that's definitely not always easy to get everybody together. We have meetings once a month on a consistent day in the evenings. So that's on the third Tuesday of the month. And meetings are broken up into quarterly council meetings, networking meetings, and working meetings. We'll get into the details of that in a couple slides. And I'm the council coordinator for our executive staff. So there's always an executive staff member who is a council coordinator. And then we have a facilitator that's named Function and Flow, who's extremely helpful in organizing the council. Okay, next slide. Thank you. So I just wanted to mention the mission of the council, obviously very similar to DCNR's mission, but it's more focused on providing input on the work of DCNR, similar to CNRAC. They're really focused on taking intentional action to ensure DCNR lands are accessible to all, provide inclusive and equitable programs and services, and recruit and retain a diverse council and workforce. Next slide, please. So I wanted to talk about the projects that Next Gen has been working on. So since I've taken over Next Gen, we've been working on a project basis. So specific topics for the council members to work on. So since March, the first project that the council worked on was creating foundational documents. I thought it was important to have structure to the council. So they wrote similar bylaws. I actually looked at CNRAC a little bit when we're looking at creating these bylaws, but I provided a rough draft and they finalized it. The next project was recruitment and retention, which we'll get into in the next slide a little bit more. But it is important to me that the council helps maintain itself. So as a part of that recruitment and retention piece. The council provided input to the Bureau of Recreation and Conservation's public engagement guidance document for grantees. This was a really great opportunity because with youth, it's hard to often get them involved in public engagement. So having their input on a document like this is really important. And I'll talk a little bit about that later in my slides. The current project that the council is working on is providing feedback to the Bureau of Forestry on their strategic plan, and providing opportunities where the council can support the plan. That will also then turn into an implementation project. So where they find they can support the plan, we'll work on actually implementing that support. And they're also working on providing feedback on the draft DCNR DEIB definitions with Arlene. Next slide, please. So I want to talk about the process of a project for the council. So the council has quarterly meetings. That's where projects are presented and opportunities presented to the council for working on certain topics. Those opportunities are generally presented by DCNR staff. It also could be a panel opportunity for DCNR staff just to inform the council, and the council can work on a project from there. So those quarterly meetings are where projects kind of start. The council members can then decide if they want to participate on a project team based on their time commitment in life at that time. So we try to say, okay, this is a 3-month commitment, 6-month commitment. What can you do as a member? And they decide to commit to that project. The next meeting in between, so it's like a monthly basis, is a networking meeting. So the first part of those meetings are an opportunity to network with DCNR staff. Generally, the staff that was present at the quarterly meeting presenting a project will then be present at the networking meeting for them to ask questions about their career and just engage with our staff. And then they'll break off and work with our staff directly on the project presented at the quarterly meeting. So they have time to work with our staff on these issues. The next month, the council gathers just strictly for a council-driven working meeting to finalize a product or kind of the next step of a product. They work totally on their own in their project groups. And then again, the next quarterly meeting, they'll present on those projects and receive a new opportunity. So that's kind of how it's worked so far. Next slide, please. So I wanted to talk a little bit about our recruitment and retention process because that project has been really successful. So we had an application, obviously, that started the whole recruitment process where the council reviewed and provided feedback on the previous application and crafted an announcement that would go out around the application. The application was also included 3 questions, which the applicant only had to choose one and talk to that specific question. The next phase was more of an outreach phase. So the council created their own social media posts that they could use on their own social medias to do outreach. DCNR did a press release, thanks to our comms team. They're amazing. And we shared it on our social media and we contacted our partners, so regional staff, other agencies. It was a really big team effort and we received 131 applicants in 3 weeks. So we thought we were going to have to extend that period, but we didn't since we had so many. We went into, after the outreach phase, we went into the scoring phase. So DCNR staff, council members, and the facilitator scored each applicant. We averaged all 3 scores. Those that were scoring were only provided the response to the applicable questions, not any of the applicants' information. So they were not provided names of the applicants or where they worked or anything like that. So it was a blind scoring process. The facilitator and I reviewed those scores in the end to make sure we had good age ranges, zip codes, kind of making sure we're showing a diverse council. And then we offered the opportunity to those who made it. So once council members were decided on, we went through the onboarding process. And I wanted to mention, we got 131 applicants, so a lot of people didn't make it onto our council, but we offered them other opportunities that they could engage with our agency because we don't want to lose them. That's, a lot of people who were so excited about the work we're doing, they wanted to be a part of it. So we made sure to send information on how they could engage with our agency in other ways. And then we sent a welcome letter to those that were onboarded with a commitment form. And we had a meeting specifically set aside to onboard those new members, get them, up to speed on what's going on, the terminology, all of that. We worked on pairing new members with current members to give them kind of a liaison to the council. And then we kind of went into the retention piece. So this is something we're actively working on. We're kind of working to understand why council members participate in the council to make sure they continue to feel valued and heard and we keep them on board. And we conduct exit interviews to understand why people might leave. So if anybody did end their term on the council, we want to understand what their experience was so we can continuously improve. Next slide, please. So this project for BRC that I had mentioned before, which was providing input for their public engagement guidance document for grantees. So the council provided new ideas. They provided revisions to the document overall and just a voice of the younger generation. So for example, the council gave a recommendation to have like camp counselors or environmental educators at public engagement opportunities for parents to have something to do with their kids. So if we want feedback on a new state park, for example, and we're having an engagement opportunity, you know, having kids can be a barrier to go to those things. Imagine my 2-year-old at one of those things. It would be tough. So maybe having the environmental educator there or a camp counselor there to help keep those kids, you know, entertained while their parents are participating in these opportunities. It was a really great suggestion. And that's kind of the flavor of things that we've heard of these new ideas, and we're grateful for that. Okay, next slide, please. So the benefits of the council include, you know, understanding, listening to the next generation, receiving feedback on our work, and then the new ideas can make our work stronger in general. I do want to say that working with the Next Gen Council has given us a really good opportunity, I think, to think about public engagement and building things with partners. So we're building, you know, these documents, or we're building opportunities with our partners. And so it's been incredibly beneficial in the time that I've been involved with Next Gen. Next slide, please. Okay, so a couple lessons that we've learned so far. I think originally we were hoping that the Next Gen would come up with really great ideas on their own, but I think that's really tough for them to do because they haven't worked necessarily in a government agency. And so it's really, I think, important to give context to issues and give them opportunities to, you know, comment on things or learn about Bureau of Forestry's strategic plan. And then organic ideas will come from that. So, you know, I want them to eventually come up with their own new fresh ideas for projects and things like that. But I think that will take some time until they learn what DCNR does and who we are and things like that. So kind of providing them the opportunity. Continuing engagement. So we've had great members who have stepped up to be leaders on projects and things like that, but we're still looking at how do we keep council members engaged. I think that's, you know, something everybody is learning when dealing with a council or board or any of those things. And then we actually have really great agency staff who are excited about the council. And so I think that has really been a fantastic thing for us. And that's something I've learned is our staff is excited to be engaged with the council. And that's really exciting. Okay, that's next slide, please. That was my quick rundown. So thank you for having me. I'm happy to answer any questions. I know that there's some excitement with maybe CNRAC and, you know, working with the Next Gen Advisory Council. I think there's some really good opportunities for that to happen. And I think as we evolve, we'll figure out how those partnerships can be formed.
So just a question, what do you mean by young? Like, is it the young at heart, or is it asking as a 40-year-old who's like, you know, sometimes you get lumped in with the young people, sometimes you get lumped in with like,
yeah, so that's
over the hill.
No, I appreciate that. And so our council in their founding documents decided that the priority age for council members would be high school to age 35. That's a priority. So we didn't make a strong cutoff that you could only be within that age range, because we know that there are people that are excited about our next generation beyond that, right? Yeah. We have a middle schooler actually too. So we definitely didn't want to put a full cap on that. But at the same time, we do want to hear those voices in that specific age range. So that's why it's a priority, but not a hard stop.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
And just curious about geographic representation too. Has it been tough to get people from all across the state, or are you sort of checking that box?
So it actually hasn't been very difficult to get people from across the state. We have some people in Erie. We have some people in the Northeast. I mean, we really have a full representation across the Commonwealth. I will say that in the application process, we probably did get more from kind of the Southeast area. But overall, we were able to and had good qualified applicants from across the Commonwealth. Yeah.
Thank you so much for your presentation and your work with the council. I think it sounds like you're doing a great job of organizing. I have a couple of questions. This strikes home for me because I was in a lot of things like that as a youth, and it was a good feeder for my career and all sitting here. What is the turnover schedule? So I forgive me if we've been told this before, but like, is there a length of terms? Are you always accepting applications? Like, how does the turnover happen?
That's a great question. So in the founding documents, the council made the decision to do a 3-year term. Just a little bit of a long time, but we'll see how it goes. So that just happened recently. And so we'll see what that turnover looks like. I think we will have to do an application process every year, probably around the same time, just to fill any open positions. And we don't want to have everybody up at the same time. So we're trying to figure out that process a little bit since it's all relatively new, but it is a 3-year commitment, and they can up for another 3 years. After their initial 3 years, they can go for another 3. So yeah.
Thank you. What is the breakdown of sort of student age folks versus post high school?
That's a good question. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I know we try to keep it pretty kind of strategic in those age groups. So we really did look to see if we had like that high school age, kind of post high school, college, post college, young professionals. Like we'd really tried to keep that pretty evenly spread. But it's not in a specific group that's very heavy, kind of focused in the whole council.
One reason I ask is I think it'd be neat if we invite them to come to a meeting. And I think the summertime would work best because it sounds like a good number of them are in school. My sense is that and you tell us if you think they would want to come, but I think it would benefit them to see like the next generation, how that works to support the agency and react to issues and that kind of thing.
Yeah, I think that's a really good idea. And I think that's just one of the ways we can partner these two councils together. I think they can attend virtually. And I was thinking I should probably tell them that this happens and they're welcome to attend virtually. But I do think offering the opportunity for them to come and even get together, that's something that's on our radar. Not sure how to make all that happen with permission, still working through all of that, but I do think there's a good opportunity. So thank you for flagging.
Planted the seed.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks.
It looks like Janet has a question online.
Not a question, just another comment. I'm going to brag.
Okay.
My staff person, Rachel Stark, is a member of the Next Gen Council, and her comments back to me about it have just been nothing but positive, and what she's learned and making connections and learning more about DCNR, which is something that I have plans for her in the future. So I really appreciate that she was able to, be appointed to this council, and she's really enjoying it.
That's awesome.
Thank you, Janet. And Rachel is pretty awesome. So much appreciated.
How soon can we anticipate DCNR joining TikTok?
That's a comms question. I'd like to.
Never? Okay. All right. Just any other questions for Allie? All right. Thanks, Allie. Appreciate the update. So I guess very quickly we can go through our work groups, and that'll be the end of the meeting. We will have a working session for those online after we all have a chance to grab some lunch and take a quick break. And during that working session, we can dive in a little bit more to the work groups updates if you have anything additional. But I also want to take that opportunity to think through future speakers that we can invite to present at CNRAC based on the kinds of topics you're talking about in your working groups, things that would help inform the work of your working groups. I also want to pick your brain on our next field meeting and trying to plan ahead in 2024 how we can do another CNRAC meeting in the field, since I believe our first one recently was a good success. And then we can follow up on the public comment regarding the environmental justice tool as well and where that might fit in our work. So that's all just to give a preface of the working session after CNRAC. But for any of the working groups, I think maybe Meredith, if you want to start just with an update on the work you've been doing.
Got it. Sure. So our work group is the focus group regarding natural resources protection and sustainability, just for context. And in September and October, we hosted the CNRAC Conversations webinars. That was two goals of ours this year. And thanks again for everyone who supported us. We're also planning to comment on the Bureau of Forestry strategic plan, which I understand is not available as of now. We're waiting for that. And we're looking to support DCNR's climate action plan work. And I do have an update there. We can expect to see a commentable plan later next year.
Okay. Later 2024.
Yes.
Yeah. Great. Bob, do you want to give an update from the outdoor recreation working group?
Sure. We've been meeting between meetings monthly, even though the chair got confused on when the meeting was the last time. And after gaining his equilibrium, we had the meeting when we were supposed to, and he's the one that originally scheduled the meeting. So whatever that says about the chair, I'm not sure.
Who is the chair, by the way?
Yeah. We were fortunate to have Janie French, who's the executive director of the Headwaters Charitable Trust, join our meeting to give us some ideas on funding sources and possible location of volunteer resources and other things. And I won't go through the whole list here that I prepared. We can do that in a working group later today. But all in all, it was very interesting. I think the members found it valuable. One thing that I learned in particular, and I forgot to include it in the original note report, but one of the members was kind enough to remind me that the federal government apparently has some money available for minority and women-owned businesses. The reason I bring that up is Janie indicated that she'd be transitioning out of Headwaters and starting her own woman-owned business. So, and we had some discussion on that, which, we can share with the group during the working session. But all in all, that's where we're at. We're trying to, our main focus has been maintenance to this point and the aspects that go along with maintenance. And quite honestly, it's like drinking out of a fire hose right now. And I'm not sure how much more ideas we want to come up with before we codify and use the ones we already have. So thank you.
Yep. Thanks, Bob. Marcus, want to provide an update on your group? There's Marcus. Oh, maybe he's not there. Okay, why don't we move on to Ephraim, if you're there, Ephraim, to provide an infrastructure update.
Yep, I'm here from the infrastructure work group. We haven't met since the last meeting, but I actually can turn it over to Geraldine, who's in the room, has a couple updates from some discussions that she had. We've been talking about getting organized, primarily looking at opportunities for a CNRAC conversation. I think we need to talk to Meredith's group about the comment letter on the climate action plan and specifically about infrastructure. And then I'm going to turn it over to Geraldine, who's in the room there.
Thanks, Ephraim. We basically at our one meeting was saying that we should, in order to get a groundwork of what is happening right now. So I just reached out to Marcy at Pennsylvania Parks and Forestry Foundation to talk to her about trail maintenance is one thing. And then also what their plans were with infrastructure this year, which again will be the legislative tours, outreach, and education. So we can certainly look at ways to work with them and continue to push the awareness issue out there. And then the second was just reaching out to Gretchen to see from the department standpoint what some of the goals will be with infrastructure and where we as a council might be able to put together some ideas to help support that effort as well.
Right. And as I offered earlier on the economic contributions working group, I think we'll probably have a meeting early in the new year following the release of the findings report in December and sort of have some time to digest that and then jump into it. Is anybody from anybody, I don't have the member list in front of me, but on Marcus's working group, anybody able to give an update, Sarah?
I can't remember if this was before or after the last meeting, but we did meet with Ally from NextGen just to discuss opportunities between our work group and the council and the NextGen council. I don't know if he updated that last time or not, but I think that's it.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
Thank you. All right. So at this point, and as I said, we can dive into some more detailed updates during our working session. We'll have our second public comment period. Any members of the public have comments to make online or in person? I don't think we've received any requests. So we'll move to a motion to adjourn our public meeting. There's a second.
Second.
Okay. All those in favor? We are adjourned. Thank you. So we'll, for the benefit of those online, we have lunch here. We'll get lunch, take a quick break, and maybe convene in 20 minutes or so, 30 minutes?
The meeting notice start for, I had the meeting notice start for 12:30. However, it looks like only Ephraim is able to attend.
Okay.
So the other three are not. I don't know. I didn't hear from
You
Jerry.
could go ahead and start. I'll come in 10 minutes later. It's fine.
Okay.
Yeah, I will participate at 12:30.
Okay. So we'll reconvene at 12:30 or so.
I'll open it up at 20 after if you guys want to jump on.
Okay.
All right. Thank you.